Hello, hello. You caught me looking off camera for something because, I have so much stuff everywhere. And if you're watching live, happy Friday. I'm Katrina Walker, and I'm a Craftsy instructor. And some of you may know me from my garment sewing classes or my machine embroidery classes, but I thought it'd be really fun to create a tea cozy for our sustainable stitches. So it's fun to sometimes branch out and do something a little bit different. And if you're an active sewist like I am, one of the things we always do is we generate a lot of scraps, right? You can't help it. No matter how carefully you try to conserve everything, you generate a lot of scraps. And so I want to teach you a technique, if you haven't tried it before, called foundation paper piecing. And it's a really fun way to use up all kinds of little bits of fabric. And if you go online to various sources like Etsy, for example, I have a lot of kind of favorite artists on Etsy. There's some pretty amazing, amazing art that you can create using foundation paper piecing. And foundation paper piecing makes piecing even tiny little bits and pieces really easy. So I'm really excited that you're here and for you to learn how to do this awesome, awesome skill. So we're making, whoops, the kimono tea cozy. So I really love Asian textiles, and so I have a lot of kimono scraps. And actually, you can actually buy these in little bits and pieces. So I have various online vendors and things, and sometimes all you can find to purchase of these really exquisite fabrics is just like truly a little piece. Like this is, well, it's a solid color, not very exciting, but 14 by 27 inches. And I think I grabbed it because it coordinated with this one. So sometimes all you have, this is like 6 by 56 inches. So sometimes all you have is precious little bits and pieces to work with. But this is a project that you can have fun with to actually create something. Now, so here is my tea cozy. Now, I created mine to fit this is kind of a medium to medium large size teapot. All right, is for the pattern that you have. Now, remember that there is a downloadable PDF available for this class that you can use to get your pattern. And again, she's put it up on the screen. Thank you so much. And that will have, and this is actually what I was looking for because I have it sitting here somewhere amongst this piles of stuff. Oh, there it is. So it's a PDF that you can print out that has instructions, and there's photos, especially how to put it together. And it's going to take some time for me to teach you how to do the foundation paper piecing. So the actual construction part, I'll walk you through it, but we probably won't have time to truly sew it all together. But I can at least make sure that you know how to do it. It's very straightforward. But what's really important is that your pieces in there for the paper piecing, that those are to scale for this particular teapot. And you're going to, when you go to do this, you want to go ahead and print out 2 copies of each. So 2 copies of the sleeve. That means there's 4 sleeves. And 2 copies of, whoops, I'm actually shaking them in opposite order. 2 copies of the actual center of the kimono style design. So, so I'm actually making my kimono teapot. Cozy is actually made out of real kimono and obi scraps. So that was really fun for me to create. So how this works. So when you're getting prepared to do foundation paper piecing, you need to know, of course, basically, will this work? And oh, wait, before I get into that, because I will just be so concentrated on that, you may want to measure your teapot. So if you know, in the instructions, it'll tell you what size the finished product is. And it should basically equal to, be big enough to wrap around the teapot that you're using. So the good news is if your teapot is smaller than this, which like I said, this is a pretty good sized teapot. So this cozy should fit most teapots. But if you have a teapot that's extra large, extra large, The good news is, let me just go to my overhead again real quick here. The good news is that this design is really easy to make wider and longer. So if you measure your teapot and you realize that compared to the finished measurements for the project, it's not going to work. It's going to be too short or too narrow. You can simply, if you need to add length, you can add it to the bottom of fabric A and fabric B for the sleeves. So that's if you need to add length. And if you need to add width, I would just add it to the sleeves. So if you need to add width, just make the sleeves wider. And of course, if they need to be longer, make longer too. But this makes this pattern super easy to scale up or scale down. Like I said, I wouldn't bother making it smaller for a smaller teapot, but if it's not going to go around a teapot at all, then that's different. But really easy to make this bigger to fit a larger teapot. Okay, so another word of advice when you're working with paper piecing, foundation paper piecing, is that it's a really good idea to go ahead and cut out individual pieces of your design. So actually maybe make 3 copies. Excuse me, I'm just going to make this not quite so bright on the screen. There, that's a little bit better. So once my camera stops shaking. So it's a good idea to go ahead and take those pieces, print an extra copy, and just go ahead and print the pieces out of your design. And the reason why this is a good idea is twofold. So one reason that it's a good idea to do this with your foundation paper piecing is that you can compare this to your scraps of fabric. And for each little piece, you need to make sure that the fabric is big enough to cover up that section of the design, with preferably at least 1/4 of an inch to spare. So obviously this piece is plenty big to use for piece number 2. All right, so that's one reason to use it. Another reason to use that is that if this is super scary, like trust me, you're going to be surprised how easy it really is. But if this seems a little bit challenging for you, you can actually go ahead and use this along with perfect applique. So this is, I actually have it by the bolt. So perfect applique is a silky product that I love for doing raw edge applique. So if you're in a hurry and don't have time to piece, this is a paper-backed web. And what you can do is you can go ahead and you can trace this. You can fuse this to your fabric. I'll just fuse a piece on there. So this is the web side, right? So you can fuse this to your fabric. Now, normally, no, I would not do this with the fusible side up, but just pretend I'm sticking that down. You would want to use, in real life, you want to use a non-stick sheet. So you can put your fabric on there, and then you can actually just trace and cut this and make it into raw edge applique instead of doing piecing. So there's just more than one way to use this design to create something really fun. So, because not everybody likes to piece, but that's where you can use something like perfect applique to do it raw edge applique anyway, and then you can use some beautiful thread, do some decorative stitches to cover the raw edges, and do it that way. But I wanted to focus on foundation paper piecing today because I know it's something that not all sewists learn to do. I had never done this until I actually edited a book on it. So that was a crash course for me. It's kind of funny how you learn to do stuff. And, you know, good morning, everyone. Well, I say good morning because it's morning here in Washington State where I'm sitting, but it's nice to see all of you popping up in the chat. So hello, hello. It's nice to see you all. All righty. So let me get my piece this together. So I'm going to start off with my main center section, and we can just ignore a lot of this. We're just concerned with the actual size of our project. So to start with, we're going to start with piece number one. And what you want to do is, number one, of course, you have to make sure that your project is actually going to fit. Now, when you're using some of these vintage kimono fabrics, I will warn you that they can be, these are real fabrics, so they can have damage in them. And actually, I'm going to use the sleeve first to demonstrate how to do this, just to make it easy. And I did actually cut my sleeve section, trim the paper a little bit, but you want to have at least a 1/4 inch around it. But the first thing you have to do is you have to double check. It's like, okay, is the fabric going to fit? And what we do is, I'm going to put this on my main camera here. So believe it or not, it helps to have an overhead light so that you can lift this up and look through the paper to make sure, you just want to make sure that it's all covered. That fabric is covering up everything with some space behind it. Okay, so that's the key here. And I want to make sure that it extends out at least a 1/4 inch past this line. So this is one of those things, bear with me, because it's actually harder to explain than it is to actually do. So I also want to make sure you actually want to have this wrong side toward the paper. I would have been very upset with myself had I not just corrected myself. And what's good about this being wrong side up is that you can use sticky stuff. So you can use like good old Sulky KK2000 to just baste it in here. And the baste it on here, you can use a glue stick. Oh, and I have a question. The question was asked, what's the use for a kimono for the teapot? Well, that's an excellent question. Well, this is actually called a tea cozy. So a tea cozy is used. So here's my good friend, the teapot. And a tea cozy is used to keep your tea warm. So you put your cozy over your teapot and it keeps your tea warm much longer than if your teapot isn't all snuggled up in a cozy. So I just happen to make my cozy look like a kimono because I'm actually recycling scraps of kimonos. So I thought it would be kind of fun. I actually wanted to make the tea cozy actually kimono shaped, but I had a hard time getting it to work with my particular teapots. So we're going with more of a traditional cozy design. They usually are just kind of this, sometimes they're a little bit more of a half circle. Mine's a little bit more of a rounded rectangle, but this is what a tea cozy is. It's just literally to keep your teapot nice and warm. And this just happens to be a design for that. Okay, so excellent question. It's a tea cozy. All right, so our paper piecing. So I don't really want to spray KK2000 right here. So I'm just going to put a little bit of, just a tiny bit of Elmer's glue stick, and that will just help keep this from shifting around. So this is wrong side up. And by the way, so I've actually reinforced, stabilized. You could even call it interfacing, but this is actually stabilizer. I'm using, it's called Soft and Sheer Extra. This is a permanent cutaway stabilizer, and it's called Extra because it actually is an iron-on. So this is a permanent iron-on stabilizer, and this holds it all together. So, oh, hi, Don, my fellow Eastern Washingtonian. So this actually helps kind of stabilize it. It makes the fabrics all behave really well. And sometimes some of these really old kimono fabrics can be kind of delicate. And so using the Soft and Sheer Extra helps to really give it some strength and support. And we're going to be using 1/4 inch seam allowances. So you want to have some kind of interfacing or stabilizer to make sure that your seams are nice and strong. Okay, so again, fabric wrong side up. I'm just going to make sure that it fits this space with at least a 1/4 inch hanging over. I'm going to put a pin in it. Now, it helps to go ahead and you want to be able to fold back on the line. So I'm going to take my ruler, and this is called a hair marker. And interestingly enough, this is actually a kimono maker's tool, but it also works really well for creasing fabric and paper. So by using it on that line, it makes it really easy for me to fold this back. And then I can go to my cutting mat, and I'm just going to trim this down to 1/4 of an inch just to make it a little bit easier for me. Let's see, make sure you can see that. There we go. Okay. Oops. Helps if you take the guard off. Okay. So 1/4 inch. Okay, now I need my fabric for number 2. So this is the seam I'm working on. So I'm going to take my second fabric. In this case, it's just going to be a piece of white fabric. And I want this right sides together with my other piece of fabric. It's hard to tell with the white, but this is the wrong side. The stabilizer makes it a little easier. But I'm going to line this up. Now, sometimes you'll have a complex design, and it might be hard to tell, is this really going to fit this once the seam is sewn? So I like to, if I'm not sure, I like to go ahead and pin on the stitching lines. So these lines, anytime you have a line between, say, piece 1 and piece 2, that's your stitching line, all right? And so if I pin on the stitching line, then I can fold this over. Number 1, it helps me to double check, is it really right sides together? And then I can actually hold it up to my light. So I have my overhead light, and I can hold up to my light. And when I hold to the light, I can actually see through the paper and make sure that it's covered. I mean, you can tell that this is covering the whole thing. But this is just, again, I'm teaching you how to do this. And sometimes with foundation paper piecing, you want to make sure that you can actually, it's going to cover it all up, because otherwise you'll be very upset with yourself when you go to fold it over and realize it didn't cover all the edges of your design. All right, but mine's going to work. So I'm just going to put another pin in to hold both pieces of fabric together. Now I could pin along the line. I generally don't. I usually just want to hold that other piece of fabric in place. All right, then I'm going to go to my machine. You want to sew right on the line. Now I've also gone ahead and I've shortened up my stitch length to about 1.5. So 2.5 is kind of typical stitch length. I've actually shortened mine to about 1.5. And it's a good idea to start. You can start and finish oftentimes your seam about 1/4 inch on either side of the line. Okay, so you don't start and stop right on the line. Oops, and I need my glasses. Make sure I'm actually stitching accurately. So the whole point of foundation paper piecing is that you're always sewing on the drawn line on the paper. And this makes it really easy to be accurate, assuming you can actually see what you're doing, right? So again, I've shortened up my stitch length to 1.5 instead of 2.5. Some people will go even shorter than that. But I usually find that that's doable. So I've stitched on the paper. I thought red thread might help. And now we're going to go to the overhead. I can pull my pins. And I can go ahead and press that. On that line. And that is one sleeve piece completed for now. So that was obviously super easy. So let's do the actual bodice, and that's a little bit more complex. Okay, I'm just going to use this one rather than my official colorful sulky one. It's already printed. So in this case now, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Obviously they're numbered. You wouldn't have to count it. Pieces to our design. All right, so we're going to start with 1 and we're going to stitch 1 to 2. Then we're going to stitch 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 6, 7 is how this works. And I know that probably seems pretty straightforward. All right, so just like with my previous piece, I need to make sure. Now again, I have these pieces here, but I can also use, if I'm not sure whether something's going to fit, I do of course also have my little pre-cut pieces I can use to audition. So this is really good. So here we go. So again, wrong sides against the paper. Wrong sides against the paper. And oh good, you can kind of see kind of the shadow of the cloth through the paper. You can kind of see that. And that's what I'm seeing when if I hold it up to the light. Again, the main thing is I want to make sure that this piece of fabric is extending past all the lines, at least 1/4 of an inch if I can. Sometimes, you know, it might be 1/8 of an inch, but if you can, 1/4 of an inch. And again, for this first piece especially, I like to put a little KK2000 or a little glue stick. Remember, that's the wrong side, so glue stick is not super like hardcore sticky. It's just a little tack to keep it from shifting. Okay, so just to kind of help hold it there. Oops, I need to move it up just a little bit. So again, luckily Elmer's is pretty forgiving. Just going to hold it where I can see through the light. You definitely want a good light bulb somewhere when you're doing paper piecing, so you can see through. It's be kind of embarrassing if I get this wrong on camera, right? Embarrassing, but not the first time. So I would get over it. All right, for piece number 2, that's just this little slice right here. Piece number 2. So it doesn't take much, and I actually had a scrap sitting here that was perfectly adequate. 4 is a little bigger, so I can use this one. So again, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to fold this back and I'm going to trim off any extra along that stitching line just to make it a little easier for me. But again, this is a hair marker and we use this to fold things. I'm just creating a crease line, and don't worry about having crease lines running all over your paper, but I just want to crease this so I can fold it back on that line accurately. It's just a lot easier than trying to fold it by hand. And again, this means I can take it over to my cutting mat and I can trim a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that line. Now see, talk about accuracy, and then I get a little bit of a ding there. There we go, that's a little better. Okay. But just to make it a little easier to line up my second fabric, I'm going to go ahead and trim that down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that stitching line. Because I need to place, pardon me, my fabric for number 2. So again, right sides together when we're sewing. I should be able to just line that up like that. Looks like it should cover up. So here's the lines for 2 that it's when it's folded back. That looks like it should work, but I am going to go ahead and pin on my stitching line to make sure that it really is going to work. Better to be safe than sorry. Goodness gracious. My morning tea is sticking in my throat. Okay. So again, I've pinned on my stitching line, and this lets me go ahead and fold the fabric back on the stitching line as if it was sewn, and then I can hold it up to the light and double check. For me, I have to hold it up to that light, but it lets me double check that yes, when that's stitched and the fabric is folded over, it's going to cover up this whole space. So this is a pretty generous piece. So it is going to definitely cover that at least a 1/4 of an inch extra all around. So we should be good to go. Shouldn't say we should, we are good to go. I'm just going to go ahead and put a couple pins in. This time I actually am pinning kind of into that space because it's not a real big piece of fabric. I'm just gonna make sure I didn't. Sometimes things can shuffle, so you want to make sure that you didn't accidentally move it around. And you might be thinking, well, gosh, I'm not a quilter and I don't drink tea. So why would I ever use this? Well, remember that the cool thing about foundation paper piecing is that it makes it really easy to create all kinds of really intricate type of designs. So think about that. So think about, wouldn't it be cool to do, for instance, a bag or a jacket or just about anything? You can take a beautiful paper piece designs and piece something really interesting to give that a little bit more pizzazz. So I like to borrow from all different disciplines, whether it's quilting or knitting or whatever, sewing, embroidering. We can all borrow from each other to make really awesome stuff. But again, what's really fantastic about foundation paper piecing, and I am extending, you notice I didn't start right at the beginning and I extended out past it a little bit. So that gives you a little insurance so that you don't if you start and stop on the line doing this, then you can have problems with the seam coming undone. And you don't want that because it will make you very unhappy. Okay, so I want you to be happy sewists, not frustrated sewists. Just gonna get in here with my, okay. So there we have piece 1 and 2 sewn together. So I'm gonna fold this over. Now, if I needed to, I could, at this point, this is actually a straight edge scrap, but if I needed to go ahead and retrim this into a 1/4 inch seam, I could. So you can do that after sewing the seam as well. But it looks nice and tidy. That's really all you're caring about. Remember that the paper is the wrong side, so you're not going to see that, right? So we just want to go ahead and press that. Now I did give it a little shot of steam. Be careful, some papers don't like, this is a really dry steam iron. It's like a little steam generator. So it's not wet, real wet steam. So I probably shouldn't have done that because it's a bad habit. If you just have a regular traditional home iron, that's probably not a good idea. Okay, so normally don't use steam. Okay. I'm cheating because I have the right tool for the job. All right, so now we need to sew piece 2 to piece 3. Like I said, it's harder to explain this than it is to actually do it. So I am going to start by making my crease. Try to do it without sticking my head in the camera. So I'm going to move this around. But I probably will anyway. There we go. So again, I use the hair marker just to help me make a more accurate line, and it speeds up the process of folding this paper back. So you can see I have a lot of fabric sticking out past my number 3 line here, or my line between 2 and 3. So it really will be nice to trim off some of that extra for the next seam allowance. So let's do that. Just keeping it tidy. Sometimes some artists will simply, if they're just doing a little tiny piece that they're piecing in, they won't necessarily bother cleaning it up too much if there's just a small scrap. But I need all the help I can get when it comes to accuracy. So, you do what you need to do. All right, so now we're going to do fabric 3, which is white on my diagram. So this is the wrong side. We want right sides together. And so this happens to be a squared off scrap too. But again, I'm still going to go ahead and pin on the stitching line to make sure that it's going to fold over and cover up that number 3 space. I know the piece of fabric is big enough. It's my own ability to do it accurately or put it in the right spot that I always question. And yep, it looks like I'm good to go. Just double check that. Yeah, that'll be great. So I'm free to go ahead, and I'm just going to leave that pin in for a second while I pin that piece of white fabric in place for the center. Okay, now I can take out that pin, and we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch the next seam. So this is what it's all about, is you simply want to place each fabric in order. So the reason why this is all numbered is to go ahead and just give you a clear construction order. That's really important. Now, I will warn you, I actually saw an interesting article the other day about people using AI to just crank these out, and they're not actually physically possible to sew. So double check. It's good to check. Usually if it's a real foundation paper piece pattern, there's generally a sewn sample of it. The AI pictures usually look a little too perfect, or like the eyeball of the lion is perfectly round. Well, it's pretty much impossible to get a perfectly round pieced item in paper piecing. So that's kind of a giveaway. So I just want to warn you, there's some beautiful stuff out there that isn't actually real. So watch for those. I never would have thought of it if I hadn't seen that article the other day. So just make sure that you're actually getting the real thing. So we're going to pull the pins. And again, we just double check. So here it's all starting to take shape on the back here. And of course, I can hold it up to the light and make sure that, it definitely fits all of the spots. And so it just keep going like that. I want to get on to some of the kind of construction elements of this. So I'm going to show you one that's already been pieced. So here's what it looks like once you get it all pieced. So you can see here's all my stitching lines. It's not done in red thread, so it's not quite as obvious. But you just want to make sure that this all covers everything, at least, like I said, at least 1/4 inch. But following this process makes it super easy to go ahead and create, that design. And there it is. So once you have this all pieced together, obviously the last 2 seams are the easiest because they're just big old rectangular chunks. But even these little the little kimono sash, or the what I say, basically the lapel of the kimono, it's all very easy because it's just paper piecing. So I wanted this to be a really simple design for those of you who are new to this, to make it easy for you to construct. Okay, so before I can put this all together, now, of course, we have this part, and then we also have a sleeve, right? So we pieced our sleeve. So we need to trim down these pieces so that it's 1/4 inch seam allowance around each piece. All right, so let's go do that. So we're still using those lines, the lines on our design, to make this as easy as possible. Just move my cutting mat a little bit here. Okay, well, that's a little too far. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to use the lines on my design because I know they're more accurate than sewing, at least my sewing. Okay, I can sew very accurately when I want to, but this makes it easy so you don't have to worry about it too much. So I'm just going to cut 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around my design. So again, the lines on the paper make this super, super easy. As long as you have enough fabric hanging over the edge, you're good to go. So it's okay if it looks like a big old mess when you first get done piecing it, because it'll be nice and tidy once all is said and done. And you can see here where actually it's not quite 1/4 of an inch, apparently. So oopsie when I piece this, but it's okay because there's still enough fabric there. It'll be caught in the seam, so I'm really not worried about it. And of course, I need to do the same thing to my sleeves. Here's one sleeve that's already done. You know, the magic of video here, right? And so I would do that to two sleeves, cut around it just like I did for the bodice, right? So I have one already ready to go. So here's a section and 2 sleeves. Okie doke. So now to put this together, pretty straightforward. So again, we have the sleeves. Now the sleeves, remember the white part goes on the bottom. And so just as any other seam, we're going to line this up and it should all match up. Unless something went really weird with your printer, it should all match up. I'm just going to put a couple of pins. You're not supposed to pin in the air, so you may have to adjust that one. The foundation paper piecing is all about making precision easy. And I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side on there. Again, just double checking that I put the correct side facing upward. And of course, my stitching lines are already on there. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew this together. So again, I'm using basically a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and my stitch length has been shortened. So it's been shortened to 1.5 instead of 2.5. And some people will go even shorter than that. Some people will go clear down to 1.0. But I personally feel that this is perfectly adequate. There's one side. Let's do the other side. You don't necessarily have to do directional stitching like I'm doing, but it's a habit, so I just do it that way. Either way, you're stitching on the paper lines. So if you're not real confident about sewing 1/4 inch seams, this is a great way to practice. And again, I just go past the edge. I don't bother to backstitch. I just want to go past the edge. That is fine. Okay. So there's my design. And at this point, I can go ahead and I can take off the paper. Yay! I don't usually worry if there's a little bit left, but you can actually, they make water-soluble paper. And so there's actually a way, I have figured out a way to do paper piecing that's reversible. And in that case, I use a water-soluble paper and a different stitch technique. But if it bugs you to have little scraps of paper in there, like I said, you can purchase and print on water-soluble paper. So that's always an option. But just be real gentle. You don't want to undo your seams. If you have to, you can kind of fold on the line to get it started. And it helps to tear toward the end as opposed to starting at the edge. Like start in the middle and work your way toward it. That way you won't accidentally pull on those seam ends. And yes, you know, you could backstitch too, but usually when we quilt, we don't backstitch. So I'm not in the habit of doing so. You can also put your finger on it just to kind of hold it there. And you can even decide to just leave it in there, but I'm going to take most of it out. Come on out of there. You can see why the water soluble paper has its advantages, but these are kimono fabrics. They can be hand washed, but I generally dry clean them. I'm really not worried about how often I'm going to have to clean my tea cozy. So, and yes, the comment was made, asked a couple of questions. So one question was asked, Anna was asking, do needles still fast when you're doing paper piecing? Excellent question. I haven't really found it to be a huge problem because usually the fabric that I'm paper piecing is usually pretty forgiving. But, you know, when it comes to needle sharpness, that's something that, you know, I kind of sew with my ears in the sense that if it seems like the needle is laboring, or if I can hear it, you know, if it starts getting loud, if your machine is loud, it's usually not your machine, it's your needle. So I just kind of listen for it and I'll change it if I need to, but I have not noticed. Now, mind you, I'm primarily a garment sewist, so I don't do a ton of paper piecing. So I probably haven't done enough of it, like a whole quilt, to where I would actually, you know, notice. So I'd kind of stick with the 8-hour rule, if nothing else. And that is, you know, change your needle out about every 8 hours of sewing. But mostly I listen with my ears because I sew with a lot of silk. And silk, paper isn't so bad, but silk will definitely dull your needles really fast. So it's more, the fabric I'm sewing is actually more of an issue. Oh, and see here, when I sewed this block for practice, I didn't trim off after sewing that piece on there. So see this extra seam allowance? I'm not going to worry about that. It's not a big deal. I could go in and kind of retroactively trim it back. But, you know, as long as it looks good from the front, you know, you're never going to notice in your tea cozy that there's extra seam allowance in there. Now, this fabric has been faded in certain places. It's a very old kimono scrap. So, but also just to reconfirm that, see, every piece of fabric that you can see the back side of has been reinforced with either, now this obi had already been reinforced with a, this would already been reinforced with fusible interfacing. So I didn't bother to put the stabilizer on it. Don made the comment that design would be fun for quilt blocks too. Absolutely. You can certainly use it to make a quilt. And the comment was asked, I think this is perfectly legitimate. Why would you even sew over paper? Taking it off is a hassle. Well, that's why I mentioned, for one thing, you can get water soluble paper. But the whole reason for foundation paper piecing, the whole reason to sew over the paper is that it enables perfect accuracy, right? So you could cut, theoretically, you could cut seam allowances and piece this together, but it's so much faster and easier to just do it by stitching on the lines on the paper. So that's the whole point of foundation paper piecing, is you're stitching on the paper because it makes it easy and fast to accurately piece even little tiny piecing, even really complicated designs. Yes, taking it off is absolutely a hassle. So some people just don't even hardly bother. right? They just leave it in there. And again, if you were using a water-soluble paper, you could just wash it out. And that's what a lot of quilters will do. If they're doing a whole quilt, rather than take the time to remove the paper, they'll just use they'll print it on water-soluble paper, and they just don't even have to think about it. You know, it's going to come out in the wash when they wash the quilt. So perfectly, that's a great question. Yes, it's a pain, but remember, it's all the paper is on the wrong side of the block or the wrong side of the project. So you're never going to see it. So, you know, should you just decide to ignore it, you know, that's up to you. You're never going to see it, but I am going to go ahead and press these seams. Now, we generally press them toward the darker area, but this OB piece is so thick, it doesn't really want to press that way. So I'm going to break the rule and press in the other direction, just because that's what it wants to do. And my iron timed out, so it's going to take just a moment here to heat back up again. There it goes. My friends at Reliable swore to me that it has a 30-second heat up time. So, and it does seem to be the case. Less than 30 seconds because it was already warm, but I told them, like, no, I need to be able to disable the auto shut off, and they wouldn't let me do that, but they did assure me it would heat up quickly, which that was a good test. So here we go. So now it's time to, oh yeah, Anna says, it's like paint by numbers, less thinking. Yes, that's absolutely true. It is like that, less thinking. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and quilt this. If you want to do quilting, you can quilt this. And just for the sake of time, I'm not actually going to do it, but I will show you what it's all about. So for my actual project, I thought I had this batting cut into 2 pieces. So I'm kind of a weirdo, so I'm actually using silk batting because that's actually what I had on hand. You can use whatever batting you want. You know, the main thing is you want insulation. So if my batting looks a little odd, it's because it's actually silk batting. So if you want to go ahead and quilt this, you have a lot of different options. If your obi, you know, not everyone has scraps of actual Japanese obi like I do. So you could just take even plain fabric and decorate it with stitching. You could do a lot of things. So when I quilted my actual project, I just did very simple. I stitched on both sides of the obi. I stitched the sleeve seams and I stitched the neckline seams, but I guess I stitched in the ditch around all those pieces. Okay, so it's not super obvious. It does give a little bit of texture to the little obi, that little belt, but that's all I did, and it was just really basic, just to help keep the batting from shifting. So, like I said, I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. So I'm just going to cheat, and I'm just going to temporarily baste it in place with my KK2000 here. Luckily, this stuff is pretty thick, so it doesn't really overspray much. It does stink, but you know, but it's a temporary basting spray, so it eventually evaporates out, basically. Okay, so I'm going to take that, and actually, I have a second piece here. So I'm going to show you how to also cut the corners. Normally, try not to cut corners in life, right? But in this case, I included a corner cutting template for you. And so you'll want to go ahead and round off. I'm going to have to do it to that other piece, but you'll want to round off the corners. You can just use, oh, there's a bug. You can use a plate or whatever you want, a curve ruler, but I put one of these in your kit or in your instructions just to make it easy. So I just need to stick this down to some, since I don't really have time to quilt it. This will just keep it from shifting around too much till I get it all sewn together. Oops. Did I cut this one too small? Oh, it'll work. Okay. Good deal. Okay, so let's go over to my cutting mat. And I need to cut some corners here. Okay. So this is pretty straightforward, obviously. Just going to, whoops, retract the blade. Let's see, can you see that? Not quite. There we go. That's better. All right. So we just want to cut the corners of the top pieces. Now, another thing that you can do with this is you can actually create a little loop to put on there. I'm just going to mention it in case I forget to mention it again. But see how I made a little loop for the center front of mine? So that's something optional. You can do it. I just made a tube from some of my fabric. You can use a piece of ribbon, or you can just not do it at all. It's up to you. But I just wanted to, while it crossed my mind, I wanted to make sure I mentioned it. All right. Okay. So you just want to trim those off, and we also just want to trim the batting to match our piece. Let me just grab a ruler real quick, and we'll just get that trimmed up. And then we can sew this together. It goes together very quickly once it's pieced. Oops, move. Okay, there we go. And yeah, I really do talk to myself. What can I say? Okie dokie, so there's one. Let's just quickly do the other. I'm just gonna cheat and just kind of roughly hack at this one. Obviously, I already have a finished sample, so now I'll have two. There we go. Do. Okay. Good to go. All right. So you want to make sure that you have lining pieces that are cut to the same size. So approximately the same size. You know, they could be theoretically a tiny bit smaller. But the main thing is on the bottom here. You want to make sure the bottom edges match up. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch a lining piece to each design, each outer design. And one of these we're going to sew all the way across. I'll do that one first, all the way across, and then one of them we're going to leave an opening in the center, and that's to turn everything right side out. Okay, so let's sew that one first. So again, this one I'm going to sew all the way across, both layers together. Now for this, I like to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Pretty sure I designed it accordingly. So for my actual construction, I'm using 1/2 inch, just to give it a little more strength than 1/4 inch. And it's easier to turn in a 1/2 inch. So should be in your instructions. Oops. And I'm actually going to set my stitch length back to normal. And I did back stitch because, like I said, I want this to be a little stronger. Okay, so there's one. Now on the second one, again, remember I have to stop in the middle and leave a hole. Now, so I could either start and stop from the middle on both sides, or I'm just going to go toward the center. I just need to leave a big enough opening that I can pull this right side out once it's sewn together. I can kind of feel the center of my design. So there's one side. Of course, I could have marked it with pins to show myself my opening. That's also a good idea, but like I said, I'm just doing this a little quickly. I just want to make sure I can get my hand in there. So better leave the hole a little bit too far open. Oops, I didn't backstitch. Oops, go forward. Okie doke. So here's my 2 pieces. So here's the one with an opening in it, and looks like I can get my hand in there. That's good. And then here's the one that is not. Okay, now we can go ahead and press that. Would be a good idea. And I usually press it first toward the lining just to, because it's easier. But ultimately, I'm going to want this all turned inward. So I do actually also press it toward, and I know it seems awfully redundant, and it is, to press it twice, but I just feel like I get a crisper edge that way. But should you feel that that's not necessary, feel free to skip the pressing toward the lining thing. It's truly the end result that matters. So now on the one with the opening in it, I am going to skip the first step on this one, or the first press, just because time commitments. But I do want to make sure I have a nice press on that to make it easier for myself to stitch it closed, or sometimes if I don't have time or I'm just feeling extremely lazy, I just use fusible web to close it up. So it just depends on what mood I'm in, but you just want it to be a nice press, make a nice straight opening. Oh, I'm glad you talked yourself too, Don. It's mostly I talk to my machine, to be honest. And I spend a lot of time apologizing to my machine, because sometimes I'll do something stupid and I think the machine screwed up, but it's always me. So I spend plenty of time apologizing. So being a sewing professional means that you make bigger mistakes faster. It doesn't mean that you don't make mistakes. In fact, if anything, they're worse, because you really should know better, right? It usually becomes because I'm not paying attention. So I just want to make sure that, and again, if you wanted to, you could put, a little piece of ribbon or something here. Pretend this is actually a nice tube. But you can fold a little piece of ribbon here and insert it into that. Whoops, sorry, you can't see that. Let me pull that down. Okay, so pretend this is actually a ribbon, or it's finished. But if you fold it like so, so if this was a nice looking tube, you can just fold it like so. And then when you sew this together, of course, it will hold it in place. And that will be a nice little pull tab on the center. So I'm not going to add one because I don't have one prepped. So I just want to make sure that I'm, lining this up somewhat accurately here. I did my best to piece it accurately. Least I can do is line it all up when it comes time to put it together, right? So we'll use pins. And I find that sometimes when you stitch curves, they can slip. Like one layer will shift and you don't actually catch it. So I've learned the hard way to be a little more careful. Now, because we left an opening at what's going to be the bottom, and notice I'm folding my seam allowances up here when I'm doing at the base, I'm folding them up toward my cozy. So because we left an opening along the base of our cozy, this means we can sew around the edge of this in one shot. Now we could have left an opening in the lining instead. We could have sewn that whole seam, left an opening in the lining. So that's also an option. Either way works perfectly fine. For some reason, I decided to do it the other way. I've seen other cozies where they chose to put the opening on the top of the regular cozy side. And I don't know why you would do that when you have a lining that you can, leave that open. So anyway, I just want to remind you of that. For some reason, I chose to do it the other way, but you can certainly leave the lining, top of the lining open to turn it instead. In case you're already thinking that, you're correct. You can do that way too. Again, it's the finished result that matters. So there's more than one way to boil a potato, as I've always been told. Almost there. I know watching someone pin is kind of like watching paint dry. All right, let's take this to the machine and sew around this puppy. Put it together. So again, I'm using a 1/2-inch seam allowance for this. Now, if I wanted to, once I sewed this, I could also use a serger to finish the edges. I'm not too worried about the durability of my tea cozy, so I don't bother. But you could do that. You could also be more accurate sewing your 1/2-inch seam, but let's just put a needle down. It's a tea cozy. It's not a space shuttle. Okay. My batting's kind of obscuring my view here a little bit. Oh, I'm still pretty good. One of the reasons I like these extra fine flower head pins is that you can see this one's kind of beat up. If I do forget to take it out while I stitch, or if I leave it in there on purpose because I really need that pin holding it all together, it doesn't break it, or it doesn't usually break my needle. It might dent the pin, but it doesn't bend the needle. Okay, so we've sewn all the way around it. Let's go ahead and pull this open. It's like, oh, that's not the right side. There's the opening. Okie dokie. I probably still going to wish I'd make it even larger, but the larger the hole, the larger the space you have to stitch back together. So I try to make it as small as I can get away with. So there we go. Let's pull this out. Stuff that lining up in there. Get in there. Woohoo! You just want to take your fingers and push out those corners. And you can kind of roll them in your fingers too. And of course, you can take this to your ironing board and press it over a ham. But you want to press it gently. You don't want to squish your batting too much, especially if it's like my batting is pretty heat resistant because it's silk, but some battings will melt, so you have to be careful. But there we go. There is our tea cozy with a little bit of, like I said, a little encouragement with a little steam to shape it up. But it really goes together very easily. And that opening, so here's the opening. So you can either slip stitch this closed by hand, or you can, sometimes, I'm not kidding, I will just take a little piece of fusible web and I will just fuse it closed. And I don't think anyone ever notices. So you could also choose to top stitch around the bottom of your cozy to hold everything in place as well. So different things you can do. I usually find once it's pressed real well that I don't really have any problems with the lining showing. So there it is. So I hope you've enjoyed a little tutorial on making our tea cozy. And I hope that, if nothing else, that you see how easy it is to use foundation paper piecing to create something that could have intricate little details. And it's just a great way to use up all those little scraps that we tend to generate as sewists. So definitely bear that in mind for just something, another piece of art, even if you're not a quilter, something you can add to a garment or a bag or whatever, just to decorate it up a little bit. So pretty straightforward. So if there's any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat for me real quick, and I'm happy to answer those. And again, just to remind you, if paper piecing isn't your thing, foundation paper piecing isn't your thing, remember that you can use your perfect applique paper-backed web and use the same design to do Raj applique instead, where you just cut the little pieces out, and that lets you just go ahead and fuse them onto your design, and then you can just top stitch them into place. So that's really a fun thing that you can do as well. And I really do love Sulky's perfect fuse, or no, the perfect applique, because the paper sticks on better than most. Like some fusible webs, the paper like barely kind of sticks on, but it really glues well and it's easy to work with. So highly recommend it. Okay, so I don't think I'm seeing any questions unless my friends back in the studio have something. I'm not sure why I'm so dark today. maybe it's because it's kind of still dark outside. I don't know. But anyhow, thank you for stopping by, and enjoy your kimono tea cozy.